A supplementary from Kirsteen Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. Just touching on the lack of engagement up front with STV, do you feel that the role of the trade unions has been undermined given the lack of that constructive and upfront engagement that you're used to, and in a way that doesn't allow you to engage yourself with your own members?
Philippa, do you want to?
I mean, it's obviously difficult if we don't have answers to the questions that our members are putting to us. But yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, there would be an open dialogue around potential changes, and we would be able to share much more detail with our members, because we would have a better understanding of what the proposals mean for them, but also what the end game for the company is. So yes, definitely, I think it's. I mean, we've had lots of engagement with our members, but clearly, I think they are in some ways in the dark in the same way that we are about some of the plans.
And this very much seems to be a departure from the norm.
Certainly I would say so. I mean, the first thing I would say is the unions are strong at STV. We have good, solid membership. We have strong, motivated chapels. We have excellent reps. STV employ very, very talented individuals across the board. We're lucky to have some of them as our reps and certainly as our members. We certainly within the NUJ, you'll be aware that the NUJ held strikes on pay last year. We had 2 strike days in which we took STV news off the air, simply because you can't produce journalism without journalists. So the NUJ's relationship with its members is strong, and I went in personally to see the chapel last Friday to have that, to talk to members, to hear their concerns, and that has continued. What we have to say to members is, when we don't have a plan, that management haven't given us a plan, and we can say what we have done and what we've done, and it is regrettable that this does not come as a surprise to our members who work in the various offices of STV day in, day out.
So what do you think should be done to protect the health of local journalism and broadcasting? And we've already heard how important that is to local communities, and particularly amongst certain demographic groups.
I'll come into that. I mean, first of all, the very first thing to say is the decision by STV to plough ahead with moving production and presentation to Glasgow, regardless of any Ofcom consultation, even before potentially that has finished, is arrogance beyond belief. But there are other changes. So the NUJ is absolutely sensitive to the changing nature of news consumption. It completely understands that commercial companies need to make a profit. It completely understands and is willing to look at flexible ways of working. It is looking for ways where that can do. But what we're ultimately here for is to defend journalism, produce quality of journalism. And the News at 6 is a success story, an absolute success story, both in Central, both in North. And it should be defended, and it's being done on a very efficient on a very, very efficient model. So we have a company that has millions and millions of pounds of turnover. I think the revenue figures, if I go back to my notes, were something like they are dropping from 90.4 million to 90 million, and that is what has precipitated this crisis. That's between the first half of 2024 and the first half of 2025. So we are dealing with a very large company that has a lot of production houses, and it has a lot of STV News. It's actually a very small part of that. We're looking at maybe about 150 jobs out of the 550 across the organisation. And yet that small part of the organisation is facing a disproportionate amount of the cuts. It's facing half of the cuts that are being proposed. That can't go ahead. There are other areas for efficiency within this organisation while still producing quality news output.
Well, what do you think in general should be done to protect the health of local journalism We've heard how important it is, and we've heard what the challenges are. So I'd really like to get a feel for what you think the solutions could be, or how we protect that delivery of local news.
I mean, I think obviously Ofcom have got a key role in this, and that's why I think we believe that the consultation should be meaningful and forward-looking. I mean, we've seen this before, haven't we, in terms of the cuts that the BBC have delivered in news, and local communities feel really strongly about their local news and making sure that they're hearing their local stories and able to tell their local stories. So I think there is a need for a real consideration about how we protect local news going forward. And you know, as I said at the beginning, Ofcom have got a huge important role in that respect.
Do you feel there has to be a wider conversation to discuss the challenges about how you protect the delivery of local news?
Absolutely, I think there most definitely should be.
The NUJ, since for the last 5 years, has been trumpeting what the news recovery plan. Going into COVID, we predicted that this was going to be a fundamental change in newspapers and broadcasting, and we set out a plan back then under the General Secretary Michelle Stanistreet of what that would look like coming out of the pandemic, and it deals with a great deal of issues, right down from ownership models, all down to sort of individual initiatives which have been taken up as well by devolved administrations at the Senate and at Holyrood. So cohesively there is a plan. First of all, journalism needs to be properly funded in order to do what it does. It needs to have that ability to look at changing trends, work out where audiences are, adapt to fit those audiences. STV has talked about, with linear broadcasting and also digital. But the truth is, its digital audience actually comes from worldwide, whereas the linear one is extremely geographically targeted, and that is actually where it is most valuable. And the third is the not accepting the inevitability of decline. With adapting to new methods of getting the news across, there is a kind of fatalism that you see within print newspapers that whatever is going to be done, there is going to be a decline. And that is true to a certain extent, but you see newspaper organisations that are able to be successful and drive, for example, digital subscriptions or other models like that, are able to sustain an income, and actually even in a print product are able to to stem the decline, as opposed to Reach, for example, which routinely accepts a 20% decline and responds by putting up the cover price.
And sorry, if I can just ask one final point. The news recovery plan, was that coming out of STV or was that a national plan? And where can we view this?
So the NUJ's news recovery plan was something for across the journalism industry, of protecting journalism, of encouraging new models of journalism and new ways of finding new audiences and so on. I'd be happy to share the details after this.
Okay. Kirsteen Sullivan.
So we've heard earlier this morning great concerns from the unions around the lack of engagement, lack of detailed information that they would usually expect to see. That would in turn allow them to have detailed conversations with their members. That appears not to have happened in this case, but there are also reports that staff have been given very limited information beyond the expected 60 job losses. So this has obviously created a great deal of uncertainty, a great deal of stress. Do you have any reflections on how you communicated the cost-saving plans to staff and the engagement with unions?
We are running a full and proper process. We remain in consultation at the moment. We had a voluntary redundancy window that has recently closed, and we are having meetings with the NUJ and BEC2 on the 3rd of November where we will be able to go to the next stage and talk about roles and teams and everyone impacted. I completely understand that people want clarity and they want to know who is impacted and what that looks like. But we are, as I'm sure you can understand, we are trying to do this as quickly but as thoroughly as we can. With the voluntary redundancy window now closed, we are able to move to the next stage of that process, and that will be a meeting with the unions on the 3rd of November.
But do you accept there has been a deviation from your usual path of engagement with Bectu and the NUJ?
I think we have had, I mean, Bobby, you'll know the exact number of meetings we've had with them, but we've fully engaged with them, and we are now that the voluntary redundancy window is closed, we can move to the next phase. Before I throw to you, Bobby, that I was just going to say, this is obviously the NUJ and Bectu are obviously quite rightly concerned for colleagues in the newsroom, but this cost savings plan unfortunately impacts all parts of STV.
You don't feel there has been any change from your usual approach in terms of your engagement and being able to give as much information as possible to allow Bectu and the NUJ to engage with their members?
Certainly in my experience, this is our normal course of events. This is something that we are not involved in regularly, thankfully. However, I think as Rufus said, we have let the entire colleague base know at the point where we announced, and obviously had to announce to the city as a listed company first and foremost. As soon as that was done, we had an all-colleague call where everybody understood what the scope of our change proposed was, and we followed up immediately with in-person meetings with our unions. I think we did make it clear at that point that there was a voluntary redundancy offer for people, and that the outcome of that would clearly feed into what was to happen next. That's where we are, and we recognise this is a big change, and as Rufus says, both within our newsrooms and outside in areas of the business which are also represented by Bectu and NUJ and beyond those areas too, but we're moving carefully and steadily through the process, and the next update is more detail to share with our unions and colleagues next week.
Okay, so can I ask how many voluntary redundancies are expected, and also if you expect any compulsory redundancies?
I understand why you'd like to know that. Unfortunately, we are unable to disclose the amount of voluntary redundancy applications that we've had, but that is being worked through as quickly as possible.
Okay, so as I said earlier, all this uncertainty around what is going to happen to their jobs and livelihoods is causing staff a great deal of stress. Can I ask what mechanisms you have put in place to support the mental health and well-being of the staff?
We've had many face-to-face meetings with colleagues, and we are communicating as clearly and as honestly as we can. Obviously, if there are colleagues who are suffering from anxiety or mental health, we would go through the correct processes to ensure their well-being. And I completely understand how difficult this is for many people at STV at the moment, which is why we want to do this process fully and properly, but also as quickly as we can.
Okay, I understand that, but I would like to specifically know what mechanisms you've put in place proactively to support the mental health and well-being of staff, given you know this is a stressful experience, a lot of uncertainty. They don't know if they're going to have a job to go to. So I would like to know what steps you have taken of your own initiative to address these concerns.
We have company-wide ongoing mental health support. We have occupational health provision in place, and we have access which is online based as a referral that anyone in our team can access at any point. So whether it's a position like this or something they find themselves in a position outside of work, for example, but comes into the workplace, we have comprehensive provision in place for people at all times, in fact, which I think is a very strong provision and is appropriate and is there for people to take up.
And are you signposting people
We are.
to that support proactively when you're having these discussions?
I think as a very as a very good employer, we seek to make that provision available to people at all times, not just in times of particular stress, because clearly you never know when you might need it. So it is part of our regular signposting and is part of our company portal, for example, on our intranet, and is the subject of regular promotion within the business. We have mental health first aiders around the business who are able to help direct people to that provision, and our HR team is trained and ready to help signpost people as appropriate.
Okay. How are you going to address the additional pressures that are placed on remaining staff if the redundancies go ahead?
Well, I think what we have to be, if there are less people at STV, we have to make sure that we are prioritising the right work, and we can't carry on doing everything that we're doing at the moment. So when we get through this process across all of our departments, there will be very clear, honest conversations about how we prioritise workflows and make sure that we're not giving people additional work beyond what they would expect. That's obviously extremely important.
So I think it was yourself, Bobby, who said that more localised stories will be accessible via digital media. But what about the significant proportion of the population who are digitally excluded? And sometimes that can be because of geography, but sometimes it's around age demographics and for other reasons. Does that mean that these people won't have access to local stories, or the STV believes that they shouldn't? I think this is a very important point, and I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well,
how are you giving people who are digitally excluded access to stories about their own neighbourhoods, their own areas?
I think we completely understand the challenge of digital exclusion. I think it goes much further than local news provision. For example, when you think about how public service television and indeed other services are now consumed, if you are wholly reliant only on digital terrestrial television, which is a decreasing but not tiny amount of people, it's still a significant number of people, but for people who have no digital inclusion, then they have no catch-up material, they have no way of watching Netflix, they have no way of doing things that so many people are now doing. Such large percentages of the population are not digitally excluded. So we recognise that digital exclusion is a challenge, not just for broadcasters, frankly, but we have to strike a balance between what is affordable and sustainable in our public service obligations and where audiences are increasingly looking for more localised content. I recognise there is a challenge in digital exclusion going forward, and that forms part of a separate debate that we're having on the future of television more generally around a post-2034 world of digital terrestrial television versus IP delivery. These are important questions, but they're not confined to local news.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you about something that the decision to launch a radio station, I mean, that's really moving away from your bread and butter business. You've decided to launch into a new area, an area where the market probably isn't likely to grow, where there's already many players in the market. Why are you looking to do this rather than focusing on delivering your existing obligations, your bread and butter as a business, as a public service broadcaster?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier today that in terms of running STV, we have to put it on a sustainable cost base, but we have to identify growth opportunities, and we did a lot of analysis on the commercial radio market, and there is a very clear gap in the market for a mainstream 35 to 54-year-old. That's what we call the target audience that we're looking at for a mainstream music station that is unequivocally from Scotland for Scotland. The the digital trends that we're seeing in TV viewing, it's not playing out in the same way in commercial radio. Commercial radio is actually growing, and the gap between commercial radio and BBC is growing as well. So it's a very robust market. It's very adjacent to what we do as well. We are, part of what we do is an advertising business, and this is an advertising business. So we believe this is a strong opportunity for us. It's actually quite a modest investment, but in terms of the business plan, it is profitable by 2027. And it is really important that we look for opportunities to grow our business moving forward. And we are on track to launch in January.
Do you believe it's the right decision to move in this new direction when you can't meet your existing obligations?
Well, I think what we're seeking to do through Ofcom is to update our licences to reflect viewing behaviour and put that on a sustainable cost footing. But all of our commercial activities that we do help fund our public service obligations, and that is how we look at this. We are extremely proud of STV News, but it is our commercial ventures that allow us to fund it and put it on and create a excellent service for our viewers. But the commercial radio launch is a clear opportunity for us to move into a market that's adjacent to where we are at the moment, but is not facing some of the trends that we've talked about in terms of viewing behaviour. That's not breeding through into the digital radio listening at the moment.
I think you said that STV Radio would be from Scotland for Scotland. So can you tell me if it's going to cover local stories, and if so, how much coverage it will give to the north of Scotland?
It's very much a commercial music station. There will be news on there, but it is very much a commercial mainstream music station.
It will just be the usual 30-minute news slot.
As Rufus said, I mean, looking at last week's publication of the latest Radar audience figures, commercial listening continues to be at record highs. Nearly 40 million people a week in the UK listen to a commercial radio station, and there's been a huge growth in digital services, online, smart speakers, DAB listening. In fact, traditional FM radio is now less than 20% of listening. So this is a really easy platform to enter. However, you have to have commercial marketing in order to get attention for your new product. As a TV operator in Scotland, that we can do that. We can bring a marketing sense to that. But to your question on the composition, this is very much a kind of mainstream music and entertainment service, which will be punctuated by STV News on the hour, but these are short bulletins, so it won't be in-depth news reporting. That's not the radio format that we're going for. And
will the short bulletin cover news from the north of Scotland specifically?
It will be a combination, like many radio bulletins, of national, international and Scottish news, and the largest stories, some of which will inevitably be in the north of Scotland, will be on that service.
Okay, so the dilution of the bespoke news coverage for the north of Scotland will not be made up through the introduction of STV Radio and the news segment. We're not going to be making up for what we're losing. It's
not a speech radio station. It's a music radio station. So it is a mainstream music station. But as I've mentioned, the news proposition that we are seeking approval from Ofcom, we believe will be a very strong proposition for viewers all over Scotland, including viewers in the north.